It's a strange thought. You wake up, you go about your day, and the world isn't just for you. It's not just for us. There's another kind of human out there, not a different race. It's a different species. This isn't fantasy. It almost happened. For thousands of years, we, Homo sapiens, shared this planet with others. The Neanderthals are the most famous, but there were others too, like the Denisovans in Asia. We met them, we lived alongside them, we even had children with them. Traces of their DNA are in us today. But in our history, they all vanished. We were left alone. So what if they hadn't? What if one of them, let's say the Neanderthals, had survived? What if history had unfolded with two kinds of people on Earth? Everything would be different. Everything. Let's call them Neanders and us Sapiens. Just to keep it simple, first you have to understand the basic differences. A Neander wasn't just a brutish caveman. That's a cartoon. They were intelligent. They made tools, controlled fire, buried their dead, and likely had some form of language. But they were different. Their bodies were stockier, more powerful, built for the cold of Ice Age Europe. Their brains were as large as ours, but shaped differently. This suggests they thought differently. Maybe their minds were more concrete, more focused on the here and now, excellent at surviving day to day in a small, tight-knit group. Sapiens, on the other hand, seem to have had a spark for the abstract. We created complex symbols. We formed vast social networks. We could think about things that didn't exist, like spirits or tomorrow's tomorrow, or what a stranger over the next mountain might be doing. This was our superpower. So, in the beginning, back in the Stone Age, it wouldn't have been a one-sided fight. And in a cold forest, a band of Neanders would be formidable, stronger, tougher. A sapien group might have better long-range weapons, like lighter spears or eventually bows. They'd be better at coordinating a big hunt because they could communicate more complex plans. The first encounters would have been tense. Imagine seeing someone who is clearly a person, but not your kind of person. The eyes, the heavy brow, the powerful build. It would be terrifying and fascinating. There would be violence, fights over territory, over a herd of deer, but there wouldn't be constant war. Small bands of hunter-gatherers can't afford that. They'd also avoid each other. Maybe they'd even trade sometimes. A Neander group might trade high-quality flint for Sapiens shells from a distant coast. And of course there was interbreeding. It happened. We know it did. But in a world where both species survived, these hybrids would be a constant living reality. Where would they belong? Would they be outcasts from both groups, or would they be a bridge? Our child with a sapien mother, and a Neander father might have the father's strength and the mother's social instincts. They might be leaders, or they might be seen as unnatural and killed at birth. Society would have to create rules for them. The first social complication in a world of two peoples. The real split, the moment the path of history would have forked dramatically, is the agricultural revolution. Sapiens figured out how to plant seeds and grow food. This was born from our abstract minds. It requires long-term planning, saving seeds for next year, and organizing a large group of people to work the land. It's a gamble on the future. Neanders, with their more immediate, concrete way of thinking, might never have made that leap. Why scratch the dirt and wait months for food when there's a mammoth to hunt right now? Farming would seem like a bizarre and pointless activity, so Sapiens settled down. They build villages, then towns, then cities. Their population explodes. A hunter-gatherer lifestyle can only support a few people per square mile. Farming can support hundreds. Suddenly, Sapiens have numbers on their side. Massive, overwhelming numbers. The Neanders would be pushed out. Sapiens farmers would clear forests for their fields. Forests that were Neander hunting grounds. It wouldn't even be a war. Not at first. It would be a slow, relentless tide of Sapiens expansion. Neanders would be forced into the places farming couldn't reach. The high mountains, the dense, dark forests, the frozen north. They'd become the willed people, the folk of the woods. This is where the first great divide in society would form. You would have the civilized Sapiens in their cities and towns, and the wild Neanders in the hinterlands. Now, think about the first empires. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Rome. These were Sapiens creations built on the surplus food from agriculture. How would they have viewed the Neanders living on their borders? They wouldn't see them as just another barbarian tribe. Their barbarians were other Sapiens, Neanders were something else entirely. The Romans, for example, were masters of categorizing people. The citizens, non-citizens, slaves. Where would a Neander fit? They are clearly intelligent. But they don't build cities. They don't write laws. They don't worship Roman gods. The Romans would probably classify them as a type of animal, a bestial, albeit a clever one. Or maybe they would be a permanent underclass. Imagine Neander slaves, incredibly strong, perfect for quarrying stone or rowing galleys. A slave owner wouldn't have to justify it with flimsy ideas about destiny or debt. He could just point. They are not like us. They are not fully human. It is their natural place to serve. This would create a form of slavery more profound and permanent than anything in our own history. It would be biologically justified, or maybe some societies would find a different role for them. A warlike Sapien kingdom might recruit Neander tribes as elite shock troops. Imagine a Roman legion facing a line of Celtic warriors, and behind them a phalanx of Neanders. Their raw power in close combat would be terrifying. They would become legendary mercenaries, feared and respected, but never truly part of the society they fought for. This division would infect everything. Language, for one. Our words for them would be loaded. Words like brute, ogre, or troll might not be fairy tales. They would be the common slang for the other people who live in the mountains. Our myths and legends would be filled with them. They'd be the monsters in the dark woods that frighten children, the powerful but dim-witted giants, the changelings who steal babies. They would be a living, breathing other that defines what we are by showing us what we are not. And what about their own societies? They wouldn't just be passive victims. In their remote homelands, they would continue their own way of life. They would adapt, they would learn from the Sapiens, they'd adopt metal tools, maybe even some weapons. But their societies would likely remain small-scale, tribal, and deeply connected to their local environment. They wouldn't build empires. Their minds weren't wired for that kind of large-scale abstract organization. And religion would be a massive point of conflict. Most Sapien religions are universal. They claim to have the truth for all of humanity. So, do Neanders have souls? Are they included in God's plan? Think about the spread of Christianity or Islam. Missionaries would venture into the Neander territories. Some might try to convert them. But how would you explain the concept of an abstract, all-powerful, singular God to a mind that thinks in concrete terms? How do you explain salvation or original sin? The Neanders might adopt some of the rituals, but the core theology would be lost on them. Their own spirituality would be more animistic, rooted in the spirits of the forest, the mountain, the animals they hunt. This would lead to huge theological debates back in the Sapien cities. Some religious leaders would argue they are people, children of God, who must be saved. Others would declare them soulless beasts, a mistake of creation that can be exterminated without sin. This question, are they human, would not be a philosophical exercise. It would be the most important question in the world, with real-life consequences. Holy wars might be fought not over doctrine, but over the very definition of humanity. Then comes the age of exploration. Sapien explorers set out across the oceans. In our world, they found other sapiens. They still managed to enslave and colonize them with a sense of racial superiority. But in this alternate world, that superiority would feel absolute. When European sapiens arrived in the Americas, they would see the indigenous sapiens there as one thing, and any isolated Neander populations as something completely different. The justification for conquest and exploitation would be effortless. These lands are not owned by men, they might say, pointing to a Neander tribe. They are merely infested with beasts. The brutal colonialism of our own history would be even worse, because the colonizers would believe, with every fiber of their being, that their actions were not just profitable, but righteous. They would be taming a wilderness, not conquering a people. The scientific revolution would pour gasoline on this fire. In our world, we developed scientific racism to justify prejudice. We measured skulls and invented racial hierarchies. With two actual species, this would be a central field of biology. Scientists would meticulously document the differences. The Neanders' thicker bones, their different brain shape, their lower capacity for abstract thought. These would not be racist theories, they would be biological facts, and those facts would be used to create a rigid, permanent social order. The Sapiens are born to rule, to invent, to create. Neanders are born to serve, to labor, to obey. There would be no arguing with it, it would be written in their very genes. The Industrial Revolution would seal their fate. The new world of factories, of complex machines, of global finance, is a world built by and for the Sapien mind. It requires literacy, abstract mathematics, and the ability to work in huge, anonymous organizations. What role is there for a Neander in this world? The hardest physical labor. Working in the deepest mines, the hottest foundries. Jobs too dangerous or grueling for Sapiens. They would be a permanent, biological working class. There would be no upward mobility. You can't educate a Neander into being a physicist or a banker. The thinking would go. Their brains are not built for it. Of course, this would not be entirely true. There would be variation in both species. Some Neanders would be brighter than some Sapiens. But society wouldn't see individuals. It would see categories. A brilliant Neander would be seen as a clever animal, not a potential peer. This would lead to social movements unlike any in our history. There would be sapient abolitionists who would argue for Neander rights based on shared sentience. They would be called traitors to their own kind, and there would be Neander rebellions. Not organized revolutions with manifestos and ideologies, but violent, desperate uprisings. They would be crushed brutally. A sapient state with machine guns and artillery against Neander tribes with clubs and stolen rifles is not a fair fight. Now, imagine the 20th century. The century of ideologies, of communism, fascism, and democracy. How would they apply? Fascism would find a perfect target. The idea of a master species and an inferior species would be its central literal truth. A fascist sapient state might embark on a final solution to the Neander problem: systematic extermination or sterilization. The Holocaust in our world was based on a pseudoscientific idea of race. In this world, the justification would be biological. We are simply clearing the planet for its rightful inheritors. It's a chilling thought. Democracy would face a crisis of definition. Does all men are created equal include Neanders? Do they get to vote? If they vote, what do they vote for? Probably for immediate, concrete things: more food, better shelter. They would be easily manipulated by populist sapiens politicians. This would lead to calls to restrict their rights for their own good and to protect our democracy. Even in the most enlightened societies, there would be a deep structural apartheid. Neanders would live in their own segregated neighborhoods or reservations. They would have their own schools, which would focus on vocational physical training. They would have their own doctors because their biology is different. They would be a people apart forever. What about modern life? The internet, pop culture, a globalized world. Could a Neander use a smartphone? Well, probably. But they might use it differently. More for immediate things like watching videos or simple games, less for building complex social networks or engaging in abstract political debate online. Would we see them in our movies? Yes, but almost certainly in stereotyped roles. The loyal sidekick, the powerful bodyguard, the tragic, simple-minded giant. We would never see a Neander as a romantic lead, a scientist, or a president. Our culture would reinforce the social order at every turn. And what would this all do to us, to the sapiens? Living alongside another species would change our very understanding of ourselves. Our philosophy, our art, our science would all be shaped by the Neander question. The debate over what it means to be human would be a constant daily reality. In some ways, it might make us sapiens more unified. Faced with a true other, the petty squabbles between different sapient nations or races might seem less important. A kind of species patriotism might develop. We are all sapiens could be a powerful rallying cry. But it would also make us uglier. The instinct to create an us and a them is deep in our psychology. We do it based on nationality, religion, skin color. With a literal biological them, that instinct would be amplified 1,000 times. Our capacity for prejudice, for exploitation, for cruelty would have a clear and constant target. We would never be able to escape it. The greatest challenges of our civilization would be viewed through this lens. Climate change. It's the sapiens world. Let the Neanders in the wilderness fend for themselves. A pandemic? It affects them differently. We must prioritize sapiens. There's a small, sad possibility of a different path. Maybe, after centuries of oppression, the Neanders would simply fade away. Their populations, confined to poor lands with poor nutrition, would dwindle. Their birth rates would fall. They would die out, not with a bang, but a whimper. And sapiens would inherit the earth, finally alone. We would build monuments to the last Neander, write sad poems about the Los people, and feel a vague collective guilt for a few generations before largely forgetting they were ever here. Or maybe, just maybe, something better could happen. Maybe, after thousands of years of conflict and segregation, we would finally learn. Maybe the constant presence of another intelligent being would force us to confront our own worst instincts. A global Neander rights movement could emerge, led by enlightened sapiens and exceptional Neanders. It would be the ultimate civil rights struggle. If we could learn to see a different species as our equals, as our brothers and sisters, then maybe we could finally learn to see other sapiens that way too. Maybe the challenge of sharing a planet would force us to become better, more compassionate versions of ourselves. But that seems optimistic. Like our own history shows us how we treat those who are just slightly different from us. It's hard to imagine we would do better with a species that was profoundly different. So, how would history be different? In every way imaginable. It would be a story of conflict, of division, of a permanent, biologically defined caste system. Our greatest triumphs would be tainted by it, and our worst atrocities would be magnified by it. The central drama of human history would not be sapiens against sapiens, but sapiens against Neanders. Looking back, we see ourselves as the sole inheritors of this planet, the pinnacle of evolution. But that's only because we won, and the others are gone. We live in a world without a mirror. We have no other intelligent life to compare ourselves to challenge our self-proclaimed supremacy. Maybe we should be grateful for that. Maybe being alone is what gave us the chance to even consider ideas like equality and universal rights. In a world with two human species, we might have never gotten there. The temptation to define human as useless would have been too strong to resist. Maybe we're lucky it's just us. It's hard enough to get along as it is.